Okay, I need you to stop whatever you are doing and pay very close attention to what is happening right now. Because in the last 24 hours, something happened that perfectly captures just how unstable, just how fragile, and just how genuinely dangerous this entire situation has become.
The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical waterways on the entire planet, was opened.
And then, within hours, it was closed again. Ships that had started moving were ordered to turn around. 20 vessels, oil tankers, container ships carrying cargo that the world needs turned around in the water and headed back because nobody could figure out who was actually in charge of that strait. Iran said it was open. Iran's parliament said it would close again. Iran's military said it was closing. Trump said the blockade continues regardless. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, 20 ships with real cargo, real crews, real economic value were caught between two superpowers, both giving contradictory orders at exactly the same time. And that moment, that single chaotic, contradictory, confusing moment tells you everything you need to know about where this conflict actually stands. So today, I'm going to take you through every single development from the last 24 hours. The Strait confusion, the ceasefire in Lebanon, Netanyahu's changing war aims, the secret memorandum of understanding that might be the last thread holding this whole situation together, and the very real question that nobody is answering cleanly. Is this heading toward a deal or towards something much worse? Let's go. Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz, because what happened there in the last day is one of the most confusing and revealing sequences of events in this entire conflict. Here is the timeline. On Friday, Iranian authorities announced that the Strait of Hormuz would be completely reopened to commercial ships for the remainder of the ceasefire. Complete reopening. Those were the words used, and the world responded with cautious optimism. Around 20 ships, oil tankers, container vessels started moving, started sailing toward the strait. Markets reacted. Energy analysts noted the development. It felt like, just for a moment, like something was actually moving in the right direction. And then Iran's parliament speaker spoke and said the strait would shut again if the US blockade on Iranian ports continued. And then Iran's military came out and essentially confirmed that the strait was returning to what they called strict management.
Which is a diplomatic phrase for what we had before, ships not being able to pass unless they paid a toll or got explicit Iranian permission. And those 20 ships that had started moving, ordered to turn around, back they went. So within the space of a few hours, the strait went from completely reopened to effectively closed again. And the reason Iran gave for this reversal is important. Iran said
the Americans failed to fulfill their obligations. They didn't specify exactly what that meant, but the implication was clear. Trump had announced, at the same time as the reopening, that the US blockade of Iranian ports would continue. The blockade would stay in place until a peace deal was reached. So Iran's reading of the situation was this: you cannot announce the strait is reopening as a goodwill gesture while simultaneously maintaining a full naval blockade of our ports. That is not a deal. That is us giving something and getting nothing. And Iran was not willing to do that. So the strait closed, the ships turned around, and the confusion that had started the day became the defining story of the day. Now let's understand what this confusion tells us about the deeper dynamics at play. Because this is not just miscommunication. This is not just diplomatic sloppiness. This reveals something fundamental about the trust deficit between these two countries. When you have a situation where Iran announces a reopening and America simultaneously announces it is keeping the blockade, what you actually have is two sides that cannot agree on the basic terms of what a gesture means. Iran thought reopening the Strait was a signal that deserved reciprocation, a reduction in the blockade, some easing of pressure. America thought reopening the Strait was Iran complying with pressure, and that the pressure should therefore be maintained until a full deal is reached. Two completely different interpretations of the same action. And that gap in interpretation is the same gap that caused the Islamabad talks to fail after 21 hours. It is the same gap
that makes every diplomatic gesture immediately ambiguous, because both sides are reading the other's moves through a lens of profound distrust. And in that environment, even positive steps can become sources of new conflict.
Now let's talk about where the diplomacy actually stands. Because despite all of this confusion, despite the Strait closing again, despite the contradictory statements, there are still people working incredibly hard behind the scenes to find a path forward. Pakistan's Prime Minister completed what was described as a three-country diplomatic tour aimed at producing an Iran peace statement. 3 countries in the space of days. Pakistan has been moving at an extraordinary pace to keep the diplomatic channel alive. And according to reports from inside Tehran, from journalists operating there are signs that both sides are moving toward a memorandum of understanding. Let me explain what that means, because it is important. A memorandum of understanding is not a peace deal. It is not an agreement on any of the substantive issues. Not uranium enrichment, not missiles, not the Strait, not sanctions.
A memorandum of understanding is essentially both sides agreeing to agree to talk more. It would open the way for about 60 days of more detailed negotiations, a structured, extended, comprehensive discussion about what a real deal would look like. And while that might sound underwhelming, while that might sound like kicking the can down the road, it is actually significant, because right now the ceasefire expires next week. If nothing happens, if no framework is agreed, if the ceasefire just runs out, the conflict resumes, and a memorandum of understanding that gives both sides 60 more days to negotiate seriously prevents that. It is not a solution, but it is a bridge, a fragile, narrow, uncertain bridge between where we are now and where a real solution needs to be. And right now, that bridge is the most important thing in the world. But here is the complication, and it is a significant one. Trump, in his public statements, has been suggesting that Iran has essentially already agreed to most of what America wants. He has said repeatedly that the Iranians have basically agreed to give up their enriched uranium supplies, that they have agreed to not pursue a nuclear program for a number of years, that the differences are insignificant, that a deal is basically done, and Iran has denied all of that, publicly, flatly.
Completely. Iran's leadership, particularly the more hardline elements which now dominate Iranian politics, have not indicated any readiness to make the concessions that Trump is describing. So you have one side saying we basically have a deal, the other side saying we have agreed to nothing of the sort. Both of these things cannot be true at the same time. Either Trump is overstating the progress made in back-channel discussions, or Iran is publicly denying commitments that were made privately. Or, and this is perhaps the most likely explanation, there is a genuine gap between what Trump perceives as movement and what Iran perceives as a concession. Because in any negotiation, especially one this complex, both sides can walk away from the same conversation with different impressions of what was agreed. And in a negotiation between two parties with this level of mutual distrust, that gap in perception can become its own source of crisis. Now let's talk about Israel, because Israel's role in all of this is crucial and complicated and not getting nearly enough attention. When the war with Iran began, Prime Minister Netanyahu laid out 3 key war aims. First, destroy Iran's nuclear capability, its ambitions, its program, any route toward a nuclear weapon. Second, remove the ballistic missile threat that Iran poses to Israel. Third, fundamentally weaken Iranian power in the region. And now, with a ceasefire in place, with Trump pushing for a diplomatic solution, with negotiations ongoing, Netanyahu's opponents in Israel are pointing out that none of those three aims have been fully realized. Iran's nuclear knowledge has not been eliminated. Iran's ballistic missile capability, while damaged, has not been destroyed. And Iran's regional influence, while reduced, remains significant. And according to reporting from Jerusalem, Netanyahu himself wanted the war to continue.
Wanted to keep fighting, because from his perspective, the job was not done. But then Trump announced the ceasefire, and Netanyahu, despite wanting to continue, had very little choice but to accept it. Because when the President of the United States, your most critical ally, your most important supporter, tells you the ceasefire is happening, you don't have many options. And in northern Israel, in the communities closest to the Lebanese border, the mood among many residents is described as one of betrayal. They feel that the ceasefire was imposed on them before the job was done. They worry that Hezbollah, despite the damage it has taken, will not be disarmed, will not be disbanded, and will resume firing rockets into their communities days, months, possibly years from now. That fear is not irrational. It is based on history.
Let's talk about Lebanon, because what is happening there is its own extraordinarily complex story. A 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah has been established, and it is, for now, holding. Thousands of Lebanese civilians have started returning to their homes in the south of the country, south of the Litani River. After 6 weeks of bombing, after being displaced, after watching their villages be struck over and over again. More than 2,000 people have been killed in Lebanon since this round of conflict began. More than 1 million people displaced. And now, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has said that Lebanon is on the verge of a permanent agreement with Israel, but that Lebanon will not give up its sovereignty. And those two things, a permanent agreement and full sovereignty, are going to be very difficult to achieve simultaneously. Because the two core issues that any Israel-Lebanon deal must address are extraordinarily difficult.
First, the disarmament of Hezbollah. Second, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from southern Lebanon. And both of those issues are genuinely, possibly, intractable.
Let's start with Hezbollah's disarmament, because this is not a simple military question. Hezbollah is not just an armed group. It is a political party, it is a social services provider, it runs schools, it runs hospitals, it has members of parliament, it has ministers in government. It has the genuine loyalty of a significant portion of the Lebanese population, and it has said clearly, publicly, that it will not give up its weapons, not voluntarily, not under pressure, not as part of any negotiation. It is not a party to. And here is the crucial detail. Hezbollah is not a party to the direct negotiations between the Lebanese government and Israel. So Lebanon's government is being asked to commit to the disarmament of a group that Lebanon's government does not actually control. That is an almost impossible position. It is like being asked to guarantee what someone else will do, someone who has made very clear they will do the opposite.
And the history here is not encouraging. After the 2006 war, Hezbollah was supposed to be disarmed. UN Resolution 1701 required it. It didn't happen. After the ceasefire in November 2024, Hezbollah was supposed to be disarmed. It didn't happen. Every time the international community has demanded Hezbollah's disarmament as a condition of peace, it has not happened because Hezbollah has the weapons, has the support, and has made clear it is not giving them up.
Now let's look at this from the perspective of ordinary Lebanese people, because their experience of this conflict is not monolithic. Lebanon is a deeply divided country with many different communities, many different political loyalties, many different views on Hezbollah. Among Hezbollah's opponents, there is enormous anger, real, deep, burning anger. The feeling that Hezbollah dragged Lebanon into a war, that Lebanon had no business being in, that this was Iran's war with Israel, not Lebanon's, that the 2,000 people who died, the million people who were displaced, the billions of dollars in damage to Lebanese infrastructure was a price that ordinary Lebanese people paid for Hezbollah's decision to enter a conflict that was not theirs to enter. Those people want the negotiations to succeed, want a deal with Israel, want peace, even if they are not friends of Israel. They simply want it to stop. But among Hezbollah's supporters, the picture is very different. In the early days of the conflict, when Hezbollah first launched rockets, even some of its own supporters were angry. Why are you doing this? Why now? Why drag us into this? But that anger faded quickly as the scale of Israeli bombing expanded.
As civilian casualties mounted, as the images of destroyed villages started circulating. And now, among Hezbollah's base, the feeling is one of solidarity, of rally around the flag. The Lebanese army is seen as unable or unwilling to defend the country from Israel. And so Hezbollah, whatever its failings, whatever the cost of this conflict, is seen as the only force actually standing up to Israeli military power. That dynamic makes disarmament not just politically difficult, it makes it socially and culturally almost impossible in the current moment.
Now let's talk about Israeli forces in southern Lebanon, because this is the other intractable issue. Israel currently controls approximately 55 villages in southern Lebanon. Its forces are positioned across the central, western and eastern sectors of the south. And Israel has been clear. Its forces will not leave until the safety of northern Israeli residents is guaranteed. Guaranteed. That is a very high bar. Because what constitutes a guarantee? If Hezbollah is not disarmed, can Israel's northern residents be guaranteed safety? If Israeli forces withdraw and Hezbollah simply returns to the positions it held before, has safety been guaranteed? From Israel's perspective, the answer is no. And so Israel has a logical argument for staying that is very difficult to counter without addressing the Hezbollah issue first. But Lebanon cannot accept Israeli occupation of its territory indefinitely. Its president has said so. Its constitution requires it.
Its sovereignty demands it. So you have Israel saying it will not leave until safety is guaranteed. Lebanon saying it needs Israeli forces to leave to restore its sovereignty. And Hezbollah sitting in the middle with its weapons not willing to be disarmed, which is the one thing that might actually provide the safety guarantee that Israel says it needs to withdraw. This is a circular problem, a knot that is very difficult to untie without someone making a very significant and very risky first move. And through all of this, Trump is saying enough is enough. He has reportedly been blocking Israel from continuing to bomb Lebanon. He has said it is time for the fighting to stop. And that is a remarkable statement because it shows that even America's most unconditional supporter of Israel has reached a point where he believes the military approach has gone as far as it can go without a diplomatic solution. Trump is in the driving seat. That is the analysis coming from Israel. And Netanyahu, whatever he privately wants, has very little choice but to accept that reality. When Trump says stop, Israel stops, or at least slows down, because the relationship between Israel and the United States, while extraordinarily close, is ultimately one where the junior partner cannot simply ignore what the senior partner demands. So let me bring all of this together and give you the honest picture of where things stand. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed again after a brief, chaotic, confusing reopening that lasted only hours. Diplomatic efforts through Pakistan are continuing. A potential memorandum of understanding giving both sides 60 more days to negotiate may be the most realistic near-term outcome. Trump is claiming a deal is almost done. Iran is denying that any significant concessions have been made. In Lebanon, a fragile 10-day ceasefire is holding for now. But the two core issues, Hezbollah's disarmament and Israel's withdrawal, remain completely unresolved. And Netanyahu despite wanting to continue the war, is being constrained by Trump, who has decided that diplomacy must be given a chance. The ceasefire expires next week. A memorandum of understanding might extend the process by 60 days, or it might not materialize. And if it doesn't, the conflict resumes, with consequences that will be felt in energy markets, in shipping lanes, in grocery stores, and in the daily lives of ordinary people from Canada to Korea. Now, I want to speak directly to you watching this, because here is the thing that I think gets lost in all of the geopolitical analysis. The human cost of this conflict is real. More than 2,000 Lebanese people killed, more than 1 million displaced, Iranians living under sanctions that have hollowed out their economy, Israelis in the north who have been living under rocket threat for years, and ordinary people everywhere in the world, paying more for energy, more for food, more for the basic necessities of life, because two governments cannot find a way to trust each other to make a deal. That human cost is what makes this story worth understanding, worth paying attention to, worth talking about with the people around you. Because the decisions being made right now in negotiating rooms in Washington, in Tehran, in Islamabad, in Beirut, and in Jerusalem are not just geopolitical chess moves. They are decisions that determine whether people live or die, whether families return to their homes or remain displaced, whether a generation of Lebanese children grows up in a country at peace or a country perpetually on the edge of war, whether Iranian families can afford food and medicine or spend another decade under economic suffocation, whether Israeli families in the north can sleep without fear of rockets. All of that is what is actually at stake. Not just the diplomacy, not just the strategy, not just the geopolitical balance of power, real lives, real families, real futures. And that is why staying informed, staying engaged, staying connected to this story matters. Not just as an intellectual exercise, but as a human responsibility. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this story is moving by the hour. Every development matters. Every update changes the picture. And you need to be the person in the room who actually understands what is happening and why. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, because the more people who understand this, the more pressure there is on the people making these decisions to make them wisely. And I will see you in the next one.